back to what we expect to be a very spirited discussion between a distinguished panel of speakers presenting 6 of the major world faiths. We are privileged to have as our moderator this evening Pravrajika Vrajaprana of the Vedanta Society of Santa Barbara, and a prominent and well-known speaker, scholar, and writer on Vedanta.
Thank you, everybody. We are looking forward to a very, very fine discussion this evening. I have rarely been on a panel with this stellar group of people. The quality of our speakers tonight is incredible. I will introduce each speaker as we go along. And the first person who will speak tonight is the Reverend Michael Bos, who is Senior Minister of the West End Collegiate Church and the President of the Collegiate Churches in New York. He received his bachelor's and a master's in divinity and did postgraduate work in Hebrew scriptures and theology and doctoral work at the University of Exeter on Islam and religious pluralism. He is currently pursuing his doctorate in ministry at Duke University. Reverend Michael presents lectures, speeches, and sermons to people and places that range from the University of Cambridge to ambassadors for the European Union. I'm going to ask Reverend Michael Bos and every speaker to first address this question. We are told we are living in a world today that seems beset with intractable problems that seem overwhelming and without solution. And many people will say religion is the problem. I would like them to address this question and then tell us how we can be, as members of religion, how we can be part of the solution rather than the problem.
Okay. Thank you. First, I'm humbled to be here. It's a wonderful opportunity. I'm going to hold this. I don't like to have my back to all of you over here, but it really is wonderful to be with you. And in 5 minutes or less, we'll solve the world's problems here, each of us. So, let me begin by saying this, that within the Christian tradition, starting a recognition of human nature, we have this belief that within each of us there is this internal struggle between that which leads us to the kind of fullness of life that God's created us to live, and that leads us the other way. So there is a pathway that leads us to virtue, and there's a pathway that leads us to vice, to sin. And therefore, any opportunity we have in a setting like this, as people of religion, to engage one another, encourage us to make the decisions that lead to the fullness of life that God has created for us, is needed. When we forget that internal struggle, we forget the vulnerabilities we have that can lead us away from that path and create divisions among us. That's just kind of at the basic level of human nature. Now, at a greater level, we also believe that it's not just about our personal decisions. There's another level involved in this. There is a famous text in the New Testament that says this, that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, it's against powers and principalities and spiritual forces greater than ourselves. And we take that very seriously. In the Celtic tradition, it frames it this way, that there are those thin places in life. Now, a thin place can be that place where heaven and earth seem so close that you catch this glimpse of the transcendent, of the divine, and it elevates you, it pulls you up, it lifts you to your best. At the same time, there can be those thin places where hell and earth are so close that you experience the darkness and the downwardness and the pull to a place you do not want to go. And though we take evil and suffering seriously in our tradition, we do not take it more seriously than the power of God to help us and transform us. Now, the reason I mention this is it's very important when it comes to interfaith gatherings. For us in our tradition, for us to be able to cooperate and do things together, we do not need to agree on what we say yes to, as far as what we affirm in our religious traditions. For us, when we stand in the face of evil and suffering, and if someone says no to that and is ready to oppose it and stand together with us to do that, that's enough for us. If people don't know the yes to what they affirm, or we have different yeses, that does not matter to us. The most important thing for us is our ability to stand together and say no and address the human suffering and evil. And so for me, these type of gatherings are important because together we can stand and say no to that, even though our yeses might be different.
Thank you very much, Brother. I will ask our next speaker to address the same question, and our next speaker is Daisy Khan, who was born in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir and immigrated to the United States, where she earned her degree in art and design and had a successful career in architectural design. She and her husband helped establish the American Society for Muslim Advancement, emphasizing religious harmony and interfaith collaboration. She has launched 2 programs, Muslim Leaders for Tomorrow and Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality. For her work, Ms. Khan has been honored with numerous awards. How would you address that issue?
Well, first of all, I'm going to take a few seconds because I love this audience. You're the closest to my identity. I speak to a lot of people, so I'm really happy to be in this gathering. Because I've grown up in India, I've come from a very multicultural, multi-religious background, and that has informed my life and how I think about things. And I grew up in a very harmonious home. I was born in a Muslim home. My teachers were Hindu. My friends that I climbed trees with were Sikhs. We bought freshwater pearls from Buddhists, and we were always told that we were from the lost 10 tribe of Israel. And then at the age of 16, I landed in Jericho, Long Island, and got the full immersion into all religions. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is for people to experience different religions because I actually experienced them firsthand. And the Council General was speaking this morning about difference and how do we break barriers is just getting to know one another. Having friends from different religions and cultures and getting to know them intimately as people. And that's what breaks down the barrier and the division. Going back to the question at hand, so Islamic theology is very simple. It's really no different than all of our core theologies. So God is one creator who has created all of humanity. And then we, Muslims, are taught in the Quran that we are God's representatives on this earth. So it's called Khalifa, or representative, or an ambassador, because we have the divine spark in us, and the divine spark gives us that human dignity. And that divine spark has been, it's called in many different traditions by different names, the face of God or the image of God. But in the Islamic tradition, it's called the spark of the divine, or the breath of the divine has been breathed into each and every human being. All 6 billion of us have that. And that's what makes us equal. And that's what gives us our human dignity. And so at the same time, because we are created in the divine image, we have the ability, because we have free will, to act divine-like. So we can be very elevated and reach nirvana and be the highest of the highest human being who's so inspiring to people, or we can act godlike in a very corrosive way, in an egotistical way where we think we're God. And in the Quran, it talks about Pharaoh being the example of that, who led his people into the sea and drowned them all. And then, of course, the other side is all the prophets and the noble people. So we are seeing a lot of people who are not grounded in spirituality, let me know when time is up, who are very egotistical, who are beginning to act very godlike, and are very judgmental towards another human being. So they don't even see the divine spark in any of us. I mean, in my tradition, we are seeing this all over the place right now, right? Muslims killing Muslims, slaughtering people, the kinds of heinous crimes that are committed. And so it is all about egoism, and this is why spirituality is so important, and this is why the work of the Vedanta Society and our work is so essential, because we have to bring that understanding back to people. They are suffering because of their own thinking and their own mindset. We can talk a lot more about specifics and how we solve this problem, but essentially it's about, you beginning to act like God. And act like God in the sense that God has the ability to destroy, God has the ability to take life, God has the attributes of God. So you begin to take that into your own hands.
Thank you very much. That was quite excellent. Thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Jeffrey Long, who is Professor of Religion and Asian Studies at Elizabethtown College, Pennsylvania, where he teaches Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, as well as a first-year seminar on Star Wars and Asian philosophy. It's on YouTube, too. Professor Long has a BA from the University of Notre Dame and an MA PhD from the University of Chicago. He has authored several books and many articles on Hinduism, Asian philosophy, and religious pluralism. He's also a big rock and roll fan and loves cats.
Okay, that's me. So in terms of my personal tradition, I'm a member of the Vedanta Society, but it's my great honor tonight to speak on the Jain tradition, which I've spent a good deal of time studying, and which I was drawn to study specifically because of what it has to say about pluralism. And so I'm going to say a little bit about that in my 5 minutes. In terms of the question, how can we help religion not to be the problem and to be part of the solution? One just general thing I would say, and my inspiration here is a wonderful book by an author named Amin Maalouf. He's written a book called In the Name of Identity, Violence and the Need to Belong. And to very briefly summarize what he says, if we think of religions as, this is how I tend to think of religions, as a set of practices, a set of techniques and ways of thinking that are meant to transform us in very positive ways, in ways that are meant to unleash our own inner divine potential, that divine spark, which Daisy Khan was just speaking about. What happens all too often is we as religious people are not attentive to those practices and what they're doing for us. Instead, we take the fact that we've inherited or that we've taken up those practices as a badge of identity, rather like your favorite mascot of your football team or your baseball team. And we're all about go team, and let's be better than all the other teams, and let's show how great we are. It's the ego gone mad. And in fact, it's one of the worst forms of egotism because since it's an identification with a group, we lose sight of the fact that it is a form of egotism. We think, well, we're actually sacrificing. We're actually doing something for this greater good. But we haven't thought far enough. We should be thinking in terms of all human beings, and the Jain tradition would say, in fact, not even stopping at human beings, but all living beings, that should be our team. That our team is all life, that our home field is this whole universe. And I don't know how much time I have left, but do want to briefly mention... Couple minutes? Okay, great. So the Jain tradition specifically has developed a really interesting philosophy. In Sanskrit, it's called Anekantavad, which means the doctrine of many-sidedness. And the basic idea is this is a vast and complex universe with many, many different facets. And it's possible to make a true statement about the nature of existence, the nature of life in this world, and to make an equally true, an equally profound statement that is completely the opposite of the first one, because we're all perceiving different facets of this complex reality. And at the risk of oversimplifying, you can look at the world's religions and see how, as Swami Vivekananda said, each one has taken up some great piece of the larger truth. And each has essentially run with it, right? So there is a tradition that's expertise is love. There is another tradition that expertise is equality. Another tradition is expertise is peace of mind, and so on. And you can find all of these in all the traditions, but each one has taken some facet of our total experience and gone very, very, very deeply into it. And the best thing, in my opinion, that we can do as religious people is to not only go as deeply as possible into whatever practice we claim as our own, but also to engage with the others and learn from them so that we can get a broader and broader picture of this multifaceted universe. And of course, the classic story that's often used to illustrate this in the Jain tradition, and it's used in the Buddhist and Hindu traditions, and I think many other traditions as well, is the blind man and the elephant, right? We are all people who are feeling, perceiving a different part of this complex reality. Each part we perceive is different, so we describe our experience, and then someone else says, well, no, I experienced something different from that. And instead of saying, oh, that's wonderful, let's get our pieces of the picture together, we fight about which one of us is right. And this is what we need to move away from. More dialogue, more conversation, more deep learning across boundaries, and less, rah-rah, my team. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Jeff. Our next speaker is Reverend Dr. T. Kenjitsu Nakagaki, who is a Buddhist priest ordained in the 750-year-old Jodo Shinshu tradition of Japanese Buddhism. He was ordained in 1980 in Kyoto and came to the United States in 1985, serving in various capacities as a Buddhist priest. He's now serving at our New York Buddhist Church and is president of the Buddhist Council in New York, as well as the Hiroshima Peace Ambassador and Nagasaki Peace Correspondent. He is clergy on call in Columbia University and a community clergy liaison for the New York City Police Department. He is also the author of several books, both in Japanese and in English. So please, Dr. T. Kenjitsu Nakagaki.
Namaste. Thank you so much. Is that okay to say namaste?
Yeah.
Konbanwa. So yeah, first of all, my pleasure to be here, and so I'd like to thank for inviting me to be here as a part of one of the speaker. And my tradition is, she mentioned, Buddhist traditions, but specifically Japanese. And then Buddhism has developed in different places, so that's why it's a teaching itself. Fundamental way of thinking is the same, but yet there are many variety of teachings. So I cannot speak one tradition, but in general, Buddhism itself, is a Buddha is a first. Three treasures: Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, are all together for any Buddhist. So Buddha means awakened one. Sanskrit, so you know better than me. But the Buddha means awakened one. So which means if you're listening to the teaching of Buddha, instead of believe the Buddha, but rather awaken to the teaching of the Buddha. So that's why the Buddhist tradition is not necessarily the faith. So we don't really. The faith doesn't require. What you need to have is awareness or realization. Because that might be one of the difference, because we don't believe anything, but at the same time we just follow the truth. So truth is truth, whether you believe or not. This is, if this water can, if I drink the water, normally you just feel, well, I would drink it anyway. So sorry. So feel good, and then I'm sure, ease the thirst is the one thing for the water does, and so this is the nature of the water. So whatever you think this burn your tongue, or but still this doesn't burn your tongue probably, and so this is the nature. So you realize this is what it does, and then the human beings we all do things, even like a question that I wanted to go back to the questions too. Some people use this water or the revision for whatever different reasons, right? People use maybe knife might be an interesting one too. Knife could be, they can kill with the people, but yet you can make a nice cooking and then, prepare things. So for me, the revision become problem or solution is live up to each people or each person, how do they use it? If you use it wrong, the knife could be very dangerous, but if you use correctly, then you can create a wonderful food and, and all those things too. It's the same thing in the medicine too, though. If you take, medicine is a poison too, if you take a lot. Right? Some people take a lot of medicine in this country, but so that's a little. For me, it's like, oh, why do you take all those poisons? I take nothing anyway. But so the thing is, the revision could be, of course, create the source of, the conflicts. But then revision could also be the solution of the problems too. Again, live up to each one, how you use it. And then, so the part of the Buddhism is this awareness is very important. Sometimes people never aware this knife is dangerous if you use wrong. But some people, so that's the difference. By using a knife, you realize sometimes you cut yourself and you realize, this is dangerous if you made mistake to use it. The way to use is a very, very important. So any revision, even Buddhism, although people think Buddhism is all, peaceful. Yes, it is. But yet, if you use wrong, of course, people can kill, and so forth. And so that's why that you really need to know how to use it, how to really, so which means you have to understand well enough, grounded, what really this kind of, in a way, it's tools too. The Buddhist part of the teaching is the tools to be aware. So it's like we always said, the teaching of the Buddha, the words of the Buddha is a finger pointing at the moon. So in a way, you just follow this understanding well, then you can see the moon. But then if you don't, sometimes people don't see only see the fingers, never be the moon, right? And so I think understand Buddhism, in terms of Buddhism, understanding is the very important. So if you do this, what's going to happen? Cause and effect. So that's why Buddhism always cause and effect. And so as long as you don't, make mistake that way, then you're okay. But again, be careful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Reverend Nakagaki. Our next speaker is our Swami Sarvapriyananda, who joined the Ramakrishna Order in 1994, and since January of this year, he has been the resident minister of the Vedanta Society of New York. And this is the Vedanta Society that was founded by Swami Vivekananda in 1894. Before coming to New York, Swami Sarvapriyananda was the assistant minister in the Vedanta Society of Southern California. And since his arrival in the United States, he's given retreats and lectures throughout the United States and Canada as well. Before coming to the United States, Swami Sarvapriyananda served as an acharya or an instructor at the Monastic Probationers Training Center at Bellarmont, which is our headquarters in India. Swami Sarvapriyananda holds a degree in business management from Xavier Institute of Management in Bhubaneswar. He is also the Ramakrishna Order's rock star. His YouTube talks are wildly popular, where his listenership has well exceeded 1 million.
Well, one of the biggest problems in interfaith relationships is how do you handle differences between religions? Hinduism is very interesting in this respect because there are tremendous amount of differences within Hinduism. Sometimes I'm invited to give introductory talks on Hinduism to kids in schools and colleges, universities, and I tell them that whatever I say about Hinduism is true, and the opposite is also true. Do Hindus believe in God? Yes and no. Is God with form? Yes and no. Is God male? Yes and no. God is also female. So there are many, many differences within Hinduism, an enormous diversity within Hinduism. So that's why it's very interesting. How does Hinduism deal with internal diversity? One way, I'll just speak to that now. One way is Hinduism considers the ultimate reality to be infinite. The nature of the ultimate reality is infinite. There's a story about how a little ant went to this mountain of sugar and got a little bit of sugar and dragged it to its little hole and looked back at the mountain and said, I'll come back and take the rest of the mountain with me later on, which is never going to happen. But the ultimate reality, God or whatever you call it, because its nature is infinite, it's inexhaustible. So no religion, no tradition can claim to exhaust the nature of the infinite. One thing which helped Hinduism was very long ago in the Rig Veda, you find this dictum, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one, the wise speak of it differently. Now, this means that though you may use different descriptions of God or the ultimate reality in your tradition, they may all actually refer to one reality. Though the descriptions may be different, the labels may be different. Sri Ramakrishna famously, and this is well known in India, he famously said how you go to the same village pond and somebody calls the water there jal, somebody calls it pani, somebody calls it water, but they're all referring to the same reality. So different labels, different ascriptions may be given, and that's perfectly all right. Another way is that, for example, there's a whole debate in Hinduism about God with form and without form. And Sri Ramakrishna, again, used to give this wonderful example that it's the same water which is formless in itself, in a way, and in places where it's very cold, it freezes into ice, which has a form. But whether it has a form or no form, whether it's melted or in an iceberg, it's the same reality, it's water. So with form or without form. Not only that, the ultimate reality could be a personal God. You could call it our Father in heaven, or Allah, or Vishnu, or Devi, or Shiva. Or it could be an impersonal principle, like pure consciousness in Advaita Vedanta, or a state of freedom, like nirvana. And all of that also would be perfectly all right. I'm reminded of somebody said to Ramakrishna, oh, the Buddha was an atheist. And he said, no, why should the Buddha be an atheist? He realized that ultimate truth, which is beyond language. And so you cannot express it accurately in language. So that's another important fact, how you deal with diversity. Another point is, in Hinduism, religion is regarded as realization. It's not what you believe, but as the Reverend said, what you practice. It's not just a faith. It's very interesting for us to see in this country, religions are called faiths. Faith is a part of religion, and a very important part of religion. But it's not all of religion, nor even the ultimate purpose of religion. So religion is realization. If there is a God, Hindus feel we must see this God. If I have an immortal soul, I must experience this immortal soul. If there is moksha or nirvana or some salvation to be had, we must have it. So the different paths are regarded as different ways of realization. Religion is therefore regarded in Hinduism as different paths to realization. It could be the same realization. It could be paths leading up to the mountaintop, different paths leading to the same mountaintop. So this idea, if you regard religion as a path and different religions as different paths, you can accommodate differences and still say that they are all valid. You don't have to choose this path over the other. Nowadays, with the help of GPS, we are all used to that. But this path or that path, you're guided to the same destination. But that, again, does not mean that you actually have to practice other religions, or you have to give up your tradition, or that you have to mix and match. You need not. Sri Ramakrishna, for example, famously practiced different varieties of Hinduism and different religions. In fact, a form of Islam, a form of Christianity, and he came to the conclusion, in Bengali he said, Jato mat tato pat, as many faiths, so many paths. But then doesn't mean that we have all got to do it. There's this story about how a man dug a well for water, and not finding water there, he gave up and started digging elsewhere. Then he didn't find water there, started digging elsewhere. End of the day, he was tired, he found water nowhere, because if he had dug in one place deeply enough, he would have found water. So the importance of persevering seriously, taking your own tradition seriously, that is also very well understood in Hinduism. This, in Sanskrit, it's called Ishtanishta, a dedication to your particular ideal. But that is combined with the recognition that all the others are also dedicated to their ideal. What the other is practicing, though it may be very different, it's still real, just like my own practices. I have seen in Belur Math, our main monastery near Calcutta, on the bank of the river Ganga, there's a mosque just outside the monastery. And I have seen these simple, women who are from different villages in central India. They have come and they have settled down in a poor part of Calcutta. And they come for Chhat Puja. It's a particular puja in Hinduism. And they come to the river. They have to perform rituals in the river. And as they pass by the mosque, these are Hindu women. As they pass by the mosque, they do this. The quick bow to the mosque. Because from their point of view, it's another way of worshiping God. It's not that we are right and they are wrong. There's no point in being antagonistic. It's automatic and it's very natural. There was a rabbi who visited our monastery in India, and he said, I hear so much about interfaith harmony in India, But where are the seminars and the workshops and the committees? And it doesn't seem to be, nothing much seems to be happening. And I thought that's true. The reason is, in India, over thousands of years, it's very internalized. People, common people, they have internalized this idea. They wouldn't be able to quote the Vedas and say to you, the truth is one and the wise speak of it differently, but they actually practice it. They feel that way. So that's one wonderful thing which we can take from Hinduism. How you handle this tremendous diversity in religions and not lead to conflict. Robert Wright, I'll end with this. I don't know if I must have exceeded my time.
Being generous.
Okay. Robert Wright, who lives in Princeton here, he is a Darwinist and not particularly interested in religion, though his latest book is Why Buddhism is True. So he said that this formula, the truth is one, the wise speak of it differently, this can be a resource, a formula for peace between religious traditions. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Swami. Our final speaker this evening is Rabbi Ben Spratt, who serves as the Associate Rabbi of Congregation Rodef Shalom in Manhattan and is the Rabbi in Residence at the Rodef Shalom School. He was ordained in 2008 at the Jewish Theological Seminary of the Conservative Movement and now serves as a Reform Rabbi. The rabbi has started Shirenu, am I pronouncing that correctly? Okay, a new initiative for families with special needs that now serves as a model for synagogues and churches around the country. This year, Rabbi Spratt became co-founder of Tribe, an initiative to engage Jewish millennials through grassroots leadership and empowerment. Please speak to us, Rabbi Ben.
So echoing the wisdom of many others here, for one person to try to speak on behalf of Judaism is a bit ridiculous. Their famous phrase is 2 Jews, 3 opinions, or some will say 1 Jew, 10 opinions. And I actually want to speak to the question where we are living at a time where so many of us perceive intractable problems, a world that so often feels stagnant. And one of the great rabbis from the medieval era, Maimonides, imagined that each of us go through this world as though we are climbing a mountain in the darkness. And we stumble and we fall, we lose sight of the trail and even lose a sense of direction. And we feel alone in that darkness. But every once in a while, there is a lightning flash that lights up the sky. And for just a moment, we can see the path and the mountaintop. We can see the peak before us, and we can look around and see that we are not the only person traveling on this mountain. But then the flash is gone, and we're left trying to hold on to that image, that millisecond moment of a spark in the darkness. And we don't know when the next flash will come. And so many of us, as we find ourselves stumbling and falling back into solitude again, we fall into despair, where it seems as though there is no path forward. And we give up keeping our eyes open, hoping for that spark again. And with our eyes closed, there is no path forward. So there's something about keeping the eyes open in the darkness, hoping for that spark of light. And echoing what Daisy had said, in many of our traditions, certainly in Judaism as well, we have this idea that each of us have within us an image, a spark of divinity. And so some of this begins in Judaism with the recognition that can we look in the mirror and believe that we ourselves have divinity in us, that there is worth. At a time when so many of us despair and we find ourselves wallowing in fear, can we look in that mirror and believe that we have worth and purpose in this world? And then can we, with that, look into the face of anyone around us and believe that they too have that spark, that they too have the ability to create a flash in the darkness? And perhaps from there, it allows us to then step into a world where we at least can keep our eyes open, believing that we have a spark within us and a spark beyond us. But one of the great lessons in the rabbinic tradition of Judaism is that truth can never be achieved alone. The early rabbis say very clearly that truth can only exist in chavruta, in a study relationship, in a dialogue. And chavruta, this relationship of learning, comes from the root chaver, friend, this idea that truth can only be accessed through relationship. And we get to read in many of the early rabbinic texts that rabbis would argue and debate on everything under the sun. But the ideal study partner was the person that was most different from yourself, the person who offered the greatest difference and distinction and perspective on the world. And so it's in that dialogue that rabbis would hope to learn more than they would hope to teach. So often I think we live in a world where our intractable problems come from a desire to make the world like ourselves, to make the world in our own image, rather than to believe that there is what to learn from the person before us. So I think in trying to link, much of the wisdom that's already been presented here, certainly in a Jewish space, one of the things that we try to do, and often fail at, is to actually believe that we, in keeping our eyes open, can actually become wiser because of the wisdom of another.
I was so excited about this stellar panel that we have. At this point, I would like to invite our panelists. Is there anything that you would like to discuss with each other? Anything that stuck in your mind when you were listening to someone in another tradition? Something you would like explained or something that you find fascinating? Please, I'd like to open that up for anyone on our panel.
Just a comment on something that Daisy said that I think is of critical importance in all of this, is that when I first got into interfaith work, it was very difficult because I wanted people to be in settings like this and engage one another, meet one another. And people live such isolated lives, it was hard to get people to do so. And I remember somebody told me, you can't fault people for behaving exactly like they were taught. And then I started to ask the question, how do we get people past that then? How do you get them to want to engage another? And then I learned that there's no amount of data that you can supply to anyone that will change them. In fact, because of confirmation bias, there's studies done that you can supply something that is factual and contradicts a person's position, and when they read it or encounter it, only makes them more entrenched in their own position. It's part of who we are. But the one thing that changes things, which Daisy mentioned, which I think we should focus on, is relationships. Sometimes it's not books or information that changes us, it's the relationship with another person. So that the more we can engage in relationships, I think, is probably the primary pathway we have to be able to work towards peace instead of division between religions.
Thank you. Daisy, speak to that.
I won't speak about relationships because all of us do this kind of work, and I think we understand the importance of that. But I'll talk about something that I just experienced recently in terms of conflict, right? So there was a young girl, because I'm working on anti-extremism type of work right now, and my whole mind and my DNA is full of that right now. I wish I could get myself out of that and go to that sugar mountain and just climb in and just bring back one little piece of sugar. But anyhow, I was invited to go to the prison to meet a young girl who had decided to join ISIS. And she's in prison for 2 years. And she's going to be out soon because she's, provided material support, but, didn't actually join them. And I've never done this kind of work. All I had with me was my sense of my spirituality and my compassion, and that's all I was equipped with. And so I was sitting down with her. I have to get her to befriend her now, right? So this young girl, I'm looking at her and I asked her, I said, tell me from the moment you were born to your entire life story, and then tell me how you wound up here. And I had all the time in the world, and I just sat there as she started pouring her heart out and talking about her abusive childhood and 35 homes that she had lived in, foster care, mother died, mother became blind at the age of 7. She was taking care of her mother from 7 to 11. The long and short of it is, I was listening to this woman and I began to, instead of getting angry at what she had done, I began to feel this sense of deep compassion, like I really wanted to hug her and, embrace her, and because I really began to feel her pain and what she had gone through. And anyhow, as we were wrapping up, because we've decided that we're going to work with her and help her, she looks at me and she said, well, I said, let's talk about these terrorists. What made you think that you could join them and still be a human being, And she says to me, yeah, but why should I listen to you and not them? Now, she put me in this very awkward position where I would have to justify to her something from Scripture, right? And I'm like, this is not going to work. So I told her, I said, I have only one answer for you. And that is that you will never get hurt with my hands. If you're in my hands, you will never get hurt. And I will never harm anyone with my tongue or my hands. I said, and you can feel safe in my hands. But can you say that about them? And then she kept quiet. And I knew that that was a moment when a shift had occurred. So I think that these relationships can be used in the same way in our interfaith work, and they can also be used to bring somebody who has gone off the deep end for all the wrong reasons and bring people back. But compassion, love, and the power of emotion and the power of storytelling is where I think the work really lies. And all of us are equipped. I mean, listening to you, Swami, it's like, every time I want to go to your YouTube things now and listen. I mean, I'm a Muslim, but I'm happy to learn from your teachings and all the other great luminaries here.
Just a comment on what Reverend Bos just said about relationships. I'm reminded about Gurcharan Das. He wrote a book, India Unbound, and where he pointed out diversity. I was speaking so much about diversity in India. He said diversity is not enough. If you actually look at very diverse societies like India or New York, what happens is, often he gives the example of a tiled floor with multicolored tiles. So it looks very diverse, but if you look closely, each tile is of only one color, and there's a clear boundary between one tile and the other tile. So they don't mix. Relationships are important. That's why relationships are important, not just diversity. Yeah.
Would any of our other speakers like to speak to this point?
For myself, I'm from Japan originally. So in this country, I mean, because Japan is a kind of all Japanese, basically. So I've never met anybody from the other countries and so forth. It makes a big difference, actually, in terms of, the common sense in Japan doesn't work here. And it's just a simple experience, too. But also, after I came to New York, especially, it's really all kind of people here. I've been living here about 24 years now. But then especially after 9/11, all the people together and that feeling of sharing the concerns, and then at the same time, as we learn, all the other religions are working together for peace and everything. But of course, there is another side of it too. So it's always very, for me, the relationship is one of the fundamental things to create the peace. Maybe before we start talking about this kind of things, maybe we could have a tea or food or something, and then maybe we can discuss that. That might be a more peaceful way of discussing. Because, yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you.
If I could also speak briefly to what Swami Sarvapriyananda was just citing about diversity alone not being enough. It's certainly true, because if we simply know that people are different, but we don't really engage with that difference, then in fact it can even become a source of conflict, because we just have superficial stereotypes that we keep reinforcing again and again. And I guess as the professor up here, I should say, I think education is an extremely important part of this entire process of interfaith understanding. And I'm very proud to be from a college where we've actually instituted the first major in interfaith studies. A number of colleges have minors in interfaith studies. We actually have a major in interfaith studies. And this is so important because so much of what people think they know about their own religion, other people's religions, is very superficial. And one of the things in particular that people are unaware of is how much each religion has affected every other. And even before this evening's panel, we were talking with Reverend Bos about his research into a period of history and a region where Judaism, Christianity, and Islam were very much shaping one another in very basic ways. And there's something else from the Buddhist tradition, I think, worth mentioning. The Buddhist master Thich Nhat Hanh makes the observation that Buddhism is made entirely of non-Buddhist elements. and Christianity is made entirely of non-Christian elements, and so on, that everything is what it is in virtue of its relations with everything else, which is also an insight of Jain philosophy. And every tradition has grown up in conversation with every other other tradition. So if each of us knew how much the tradition we practice is indebted to all the others, then that could also help to mitigate this, because you realize that in attacking or hating something else, you're hating part of yourself.
Yeah. Just to add to that point, I think there's a strength and vulnerability that's important in this kind of work, of being able to have the humility, the vulnerability, not only to recognize how much we have all been made up of what has come before us from every corner of the world, but also the vulnerability to recognize our own limitations. In the Torah, there's the story of Moses, who shockingly actually learns from his father-in-law, which is, for many of us who have father-in-laws, that's a difficult thing to imagine. But his father-in-law, Jethro, was a pagan high priest, actually of a nation that was an enemy of Israel. And the early rabbis were so shocked by the idea that Moses would learn from a pagan priest that they could only imagine that worked if Jethro actually had converted to Judaism. So the early rabbis refused to read Jethro as what is written in the Torah as a pagan high priest. But an early church father, Origen, says this is the moment where we get to see the greatness of Moses, for he recognized that wisdom could come from any person at any place. And I think in sometimes also recognizing the limitations of our own traditions, the ways in which we have been too constricted and too limited in being able to see the expansiveness of the wisdom that's out there.
And we're all certainly gaining from the wisdom that we're all learning right here, right now. Upon which I'd like to ask another question about how can we make interfaith relevant? Because it seems very often that the people who engage in interfaith and the people who come to attend interfaith are the very people who are the most broad-minded of the tradition. So how do we make interfaith discussion relevant, and how do we kind of bring our own enthusiasm from learning to others to our congregations? How do we expand that? And I'd like to go backwards, beginning with you.
Sure. I think one of the wonders of living in the world today, there are plenty of things that are not wonderful, but one of the wonders of living in the world today is we have a level of potential interconnectedness that's never existed before. Different traditions, different philosophies, different forms of poetry that are colliding, and new things are being created. And I think one of the other elements is that 50, 60 years ago in this country, religion thrived because it allowed for there to be centers and clusters of communities that formed and forged strong identity by isolating themselves from the world around them. It was the strength of uniformity that was isolationist. And in a world like today, we're now seeing that the great trend of religion in America is a huge decline. That is the big epic story of every faith tradition in America. But there's a rise of the nuns, and I don't mean religious women.
Not me.
Not you. The
Anyone wanna
NONEs. A huge number of people that don't identify with religion, but are spiritually seeking, and are interested in pulling and calling from any source of wisdom they can. And as I'm working with the millennials, I'm seeing they don't care about the labels. They don't care about, actually, they're very skeptical of institutions. But what they are looking for is authenticity, which is something that each of our traditions has. And there's something exciting that comes when we throw things together, collide them together, and see what new bubbles up. So I wonder if we have the strength in our own traditions, the security in ourselves, to be willing to throw ourselves in these situations and to see what happens when we collide and what new things may bubble up, because I think we have a rising generation that's hungry for exactly that.
Good.
I'll take up from where the rabbi talked about the nuns. Again, the N-O-N-E, not the N-U-N. I wonder if Bill is here. He is 93, and he's been in Vedanta since 1955. And every day, you could just raise your hand maybe. You don't have to stand. Yes, there he is. And every day I have lunch with him, and he asks me a question. Almost every other day he asks me, "But Swami, what are you going to do about the nuns?" By which he means people who are the young people who are not particularly interested in any particular tradition, in organized religion, but they have a spiritual hunger. So one thing that we see in the world today is a kind of syncretic approach towards spirituality. In India, I have seen young people who are interested in Sufi music, in Buddhist mindfulness meditation, in Advaita philosophy. Swami Vivekananda was one of the first to be so syncretic, I think, because one of his favorite books, when he would go, he would have the Bhagavad Gita and he would have the Imitation of Christ. Thomas A. Kempis with him. And that's one of my favorite books too. Now, often this makes teachers of religion uncomfortable because teachers of religion would like things to be neat. People stay in their boxes. You can relate to each other, but still should be neat. And the syncretism is very messy. People are free to do what they are doing. I remember in an Interfaith Conference, when I said this, a gentleman from the audience asked me, "But Swami, is this good? This mixing and matching?" I said, "I don't know if it's good, but it's a fact. It's happening all over the world." So yes, one way of dealing with that problem is what's already happening. The nuns themselves, there is a category of SBNR, spiritual but not religious. I don't entirely agree with that approach, but there is merit to that. So the nuns, the SBNR, they are all signs of what is happening in the world, and there is wisdom there. There's wisdom there. You'll notice that they do not have religious conflict. Yeah.
So actually, I just went to the Namaste bookstore. But then the thing is, my book was there. Well, I brought 3 books too. But anyway, I'll talk about it a little bit later. But then I just happened to ask the questions. Since we were talking about sometimes religious people who don't want to read the books and so forth anymore or something maybe, or away from the church at least, then what about the books things? And I asked the question, how's your book sale? Is it start going to decline or the other religions and so forth? He said, no, they're building another store, meaning like more people are interested in the spirituality. But then also there's a book for the Buddhism, Judaism, Hinduism, everything is there too. And then they say, well, what about book? Then I ask, and then they say, oh no, everything is growing up. So I was actually surprised to hear those things. So which means people are looking for something important, that maybe truth in your life, or something that they can really found maybe center of their lives too. Spiritual life and central. So that particular is, I guess, for any of the religion when we start. Right? Buddhism or Hindus, anything. Probably they start from that particular mind, right? At least the Buddhism, Buddha start to look for, searching for his own path to liberate, or these are problems that I have. How can I find the truth, or how can I solve this particular problem that I have? So that was a seeking points. From that sense, I guess, I don't know, the institutionally maybe not that great, but yet in terms of spirituality or seeking something, the truth is probably growing in a way because of the unstable of the society too. When the society is so stable, people don't look for anything, but now it's getting chaotic. Sometimes people think, what should I do for the chaotic, these problems? But then problems, when we have a problem, that's the moment you can find really the truth. Because sometimes when life is, when the world is so peaceful, we don't have to talk about peace and so forth. But then those society become changed to now it's a very dangerous situation. Then the people start talking about, peace, forget about the peace. We need to, secure ourselves and so forth. So it changes. So which means, the society, the problem is not really the problem. Problem is the way to really realize something important of our life. And then so I forgot what was the questions, but anyway, sorry.
Relevant.
But then my challenge for the interfaith part is actually the opposite idea. Because people who come to the interfaith, they always come. So I see, how are you? Met you again, which is nice. But on the other hand, we never met certain people who are not interested in this kind of work. Then that's the kind of challenges that we have. And so in a way, the book, I mentioned it, but that's actually a challenge to me. It's about the swastika. So it's like half of the people feel like this is evil. And then on the other side is this is, one of the greatest auspicious symbols. Then what is going to happen if those two things happen, coming on a table? I mean, that's, I think, one of the things too, like a terrorist and then also the other countries. We don't debate, or we don't talk, right? Supposed to be. So then if we don't talk, then how can you do anything? So in a way, for me, the most important part is like this dialogue, but it could be the dialogue between the one who come to the interfaith, who don't come to the interfaith, maybe the one thing that we may be create. But then in order to do that, we need to have a safe space to do those things. They don't bring the weapons or anything, but they just come. But it is like a tea house. I mean, Japanese tea house. I mean, no, it's historically speaking, this is what happens in a tea house. Is that they cannot bring any weapons because the door is too tiny, and then when they come in, they have to bow. They have to respect in a way, and then but then that's a safe space. And then they have a tea, they enjoy the tea. But then at the same time, so that's a human and human meeting, not the terrorists or somebody, but then religious, different religion, but rather it's a people we meet. So I think I mentioned in the very beginning, but the people is the one who, creating the, fighting, not the religions or anything. But, they can blame anything, but it's actually the people. The people should be responsible how religion should be used and how, they'll be, sorry. But that's, you got the point, right? So, well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nakagaki. I would continue that with Professor Long. How do we bring the rest of the barn out there?
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to say something hopefully bold and interesting, which is that this spiritual but not religious movement, I think, has a lot of hope attached to it, actually. And again, there are aspects of it which I don't entirely agree with either. But one of the things that is very interesting about the spiritual but not religious movement is that it involves quite a lot of pluralism. It involves, one of the reasons people say they're not religious is because they take religion to mean exclusive allegiance to just one tradition. And the attitude of many, certainly of my students who put themselves in that category, is not that they're anti-religion. There's so many awesome religions. How do you fit yourself into just one? And that makes me think about India. It makes me think about what D.Z. Khan was saying, what Swami Sarvapriyananda was saying, and what I've also witnessed, that it's been a very common thing in most of Indian civilization, most of history, even for people who are not particularly educated in a specific tradition, to have this sort of multi-religious respect, participating in one another's festivals, worshiping one another's deities, incorporating elements of many traditions, in fact, into their spirituality. I looked at Japan, where, it's not that people practice Shinto or Buddhism, they practice Shinto and Buddhism, and maybe Christianity too on some level. So the sort of bold comment I'm going to make, maybe it's not all that bold, but I don't think that this movement is actually new. I think it's new to the West, or recently rediscovered maybe in the West, that we don't have to think in terms of sealed off, compartmentalized identities. And in fact, to the extent that the West has exported this idea of separate compartmentalized identities to places like India, it's been pretty destructive as a result. It has erected barriers which were not present before. I remember hearing a story from a very respected scholar in my field, Arvind Sharma, talking about how during the period of the British Empire, there was a census done in Gujarat on how many Hindus are there, how many Muslims are there, and the census takers came back and they said, well, we can't tell because everybody is practicing, the Hindus are all reading the Quran and the Muslims are all doing puja, and how do we know? And the response they received from the British government was, that's not the correct answer. We want to know how many Hindus there are and how many Muslims there are. So people were sort of put into boxes. You fast forward to the same region of India in the early 21st century, horrible fratricide happening, right? People, there were terrible riots between the two communities in Ahmedabad in 2002, which at one time did not think of themselves as two communities, but one community with these various interweaving strands. So maybe we're recreating in the West now what the rest of the world had right all along, and we'll need to re-export it possibly at some point. Now, this does connect to the question of how is interfaith relevant, because I think many of the people who are drawn to interfaith are also of this bent of seeing truth in many religions. And I think it is a movement that can build. And since Sister Vrajaprana mentioned my Star Wars seminar, I'll just quote Yoda really quickly. The path to the dark side is quick and easy. It's very easy to get on Twitter and say something nasty to the whole world because you're in that mood, and our technology's made it easy to do that. By the way, I'm not referring to anyone in particular. Anyone can do that, right? Anyone is capable of doing that. But the path of the good, right? The path to harmony requires patience. It's slow. We need to study. We need to slow down and absorb things and not be in such a huge hurry all of the time. And that's the bent of mind that's required to really, dig that well deep and not just have the sort of superficial understanding of religions.
Just an interesting fact I had read about that survey you're talking about, the census in western part of India during the British Raj. There were actually several thousand people who responded, whether they're Muslims or Hindus. They responded that we are Muslim Hindus. Yeah. And that's something that simply won't happen today. Today we think we are very clear, we are Muslims or Hindus. Now the question is, are we clear or were they more clear than we are? Maybe they had more clarity.
This is such an exciting conversation. So I think that, like Professor Long said, this is nothing new. There have always been spiritual seekers in every society, in every century, and we've heard of great spiritual seekers who then become spiritual guides for so many other people, and people went all the way to India to join the movements. You must have been a spiritual seeker. I also was in a very dark days of my life here because I went through an identity crisis. I came from India, landed here at the age of 15 in a Jewish neighborhood, and then the Iranian Revolution happened. I saw all this violence committed in the name of my religion, and I'm like, who am I? And I'm sure that some young people here are probably going through that kind of deep sort of internalizing of, I don't like what my tradition is doing in the name of my religion. And some people, if you have the right spiritual guide in front of you to help you with that, then you're in a good place. But if you don't, and you are on this journey all by yourself, it can be a very lonely journey. So I went through the abyss. I went around and around until I was literally at the point where I said, I don't believe in any of this stuff. Religion is nonsense. It's an opium for the masses. I was quoting all these great secularists who were saying there's no such thing as God. Now, in Islam, the greatest crime is to deny God's existence. That's like the ultimate crime. And so I went to my mother, and I declared, I knew that she was the only safe person who I could declare this with. And I told her right to her face, I'd gone after many years, and I was in Kashmir, in my own home. I said, I don't believe in God. It's all nonsense and rubbish. And she just looked at me, and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, I know you have forgotten God, but he has not forgotten you, so I pray for the day when you'll find him. That's what precipitated my journey. I said, I got to look for this guy. Where is he? And so I would go everywhere. I even landed in ashrams. I landed in all the mosques. I went to all the spiritual places. I was seeking God everywhere. And then I went to a library, a little place with a neon sign saying Sufi books on it. And I opened up a book, and there was this Rumi poem that said, you're looking for God, you go to the temple, he's not there. I was looking for God. went to the church, couldn't find him there, went to the monastery, couldn't find him there, went to the synagogue, couldn't find him there, and, of course, thought he could go to the mosque and God would surely be there. And then I looked in my heart and he was there. And I think that, so that's what we have to help young people with right now. I tell people, don't worry, if you're on a spiritual path, it's fine. Just look for God within yourself. Start with that. And then us who are in the religion business, who have institutions, maybe we can be there for them. And I know that the millennials want action. They want to do things. So seva is part of your tradition. Service is part of my tradition. It's part of the Jewish tradition, social justice, part of all our traditions. They want to do seva. They want to do service work. So we should double up and do more, community work, that they can help the hungry, the poor, this is what they love. And that is faith in action. And I think if we do that collectively, or we can do that collectively, or we can do that independently. And I think once people start serving others, they become godlike. They feel God inside of them. And the more they do that, then they will elevate into the practice, and they will elevate into then they'll want to go to the temple, they'll want to go to the mosque, and be connected to a bigger community because they'll mature in their own spirituality. So I think it's just a process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Beautiful. We have just a couple minutes, so I'm going to ask you to speak for just a couple of minutes because we want to open this up to you.
Certainly.
So that you can ask questions to our brilliant speakers here.
I will just say 3 simple things about this, and really my mind's spinning with this idea of spiritual but not religious. I think that's important when it comes to helping interfaith work. First, in some sense, spiritual but not religious, some would describe as those that are spiritual refugees. Not moving away from faith itself, but moving away from religious institutions. Religious institutions that have lost their sense of purpose, and to be a part of an institution whose sole reason is to continue the existence of the institution is not enough for the next generation. And so they're abandoning that. And so for us,
Thank you.
For us, to echo Daisy, and they would also say that until someone stands up and says no to the evil, the injustice, the oppression, the marginalization of anybody, stop sitting around in your temples and synagogues and churches and talking about it. Get out there and do something about it. And I think when we begin to come together to do something about it, we'll see a change. The second thing I would say is that until we provide space at the table for those that are both inclusive and exclusive, we won't get anywhere. Because we can gather together like-minded people who might be more inclusive and pluralist in orientation, but there are many people out there in the world, many who are exclusivistic, and until we invite all to the table with respect and civility, I don't think we're going to get very far. And the third thing I'd say, and I hope this doesn't sound defensive like the problem's them, not us, but I think there's another thing that people are saying when they say spiritual but not religious. That is the growing trend of isolationism as individuals. Loneliness is epidemic. And people are struggling, and they struggle on how to be in relationships and community. And spiritual but not religious can be code to say, I just struggle to be in the community. I don't know what it means to sit next to people who think differently than me, that vote differently than me, they have different religious views, whose babies cry. I'm out. And we need to help people understand what it means to live in a vibrant and vital community.
Thank you very much for that, especially for the last point that we often avoid talking about. And this should also be a place where we can ask uncomfortable questions, thoughtful questions as well. So I will bring this up to you, the public. I ask that you please do not make your own speeches. We've done that. We've done that for you. So I ask that everyone make their questions very clear and concise, and then who would you like to ask the question to? Raise your hand. Yes, in the back.
Hello. I don't know the person on the panel I'm putting this to, so I guess anybody could pick up the question. But it was very interesting to note that recognizing diversity is not enough, but we should try to try to aim for the unity underlying the diversity, right? So my question is about that. So in our workplaces, there are a lot of emails and a lot of work and action about diversity and inclusion. And up until this point, I didn't realize that they were sort of two different things. It's only from this panel that I realized that, yes, there's diversity, and there's the second part, which is inclusion. So what are the things that one could, what are the actions, both mentally and practically, one could take to go from merely recognizing diversity all the way to inclusion? That is, a few years ago, I was aware of religious tolerance, but later on, I think the word is religious acceptance. And then now the word embrace came up in the panel. So I think these are, even though they sort of mean the same, they are different at a level. So you're not merely putting up with somebody else's differences or their natures, but you're accepting them. But I think the next level is also embracing and feeling that unity. So I would like to ask, what sort of mental attitudes or some work that each person can do, like homework, and how do we manifest that practically?
Thank you very much. Which one of our panelists would like to speak to that? Anyone? Jump.
Sure, okay. Yeah. Why not? Incredible question. The word that comes to mind is a word that tends to be misused. And I think actually Dr. Long brought this up, pluralism. Most of us use the word pluralism in the sense of I tolerate your existence and you tolerate mine. But true pluralism comes from the recognition and the belief that I have truth and the belief that you have truth. And I don't necessarily have to agree with your truth, nor do you have to agree with mine, but I, in a true pluralistic sense, would want and desire for your truth to continue. And I think in a world like today, and I'm going to use just a political example for right now, if we were to have a debate over which is more of a priority, environmentalism or jobs, we would see the objective in that conversation is for me to convince you to be like me. However, if everyone agreed with me on my value, the world would be a terrible place. We need people who are willing to stand for a truth that is not our own. And I think some of what's difficult in the world today is we refuse to do that. So true pluralism is the recognition that, yes, there's so much that unites us, but there are things that are very different between each of our traditions, and actually we need to surface those differences and be willing to say, I actually see value in that difference, and I don't want you to be like me. I want you to stand for something different than me because we need that in this world.
Thank you.
In my mind, I always thinking of the orchestra, because each one has a different, diversity in a way. Each one has number one too. But then when the orchestra comes, they, create something different, right? I mean, if the violin is a number one too, and then they can create the, sound of the violin, the piano, everything. But yet, you get the points, right? So each one is a different, but then when it comes to inclusive, then they start respecting, mutually listen to the other sound, but then they respect their own, sound as well as the other's sound. And then so that's why you can create the great harmony. That's in my mind always for the interfaith. I just, sharing my way of looking at it.
I would just add, in addition to what the rabbi said and what the Reverend has just said, that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, both, all too often it seems to be sort of imposed by someone in the human resources office, and we have that in the education system too. We have that at our college as well, and it often, as a result of that, creates the opposite of what it is intended to. And we had a very unpleasant and strange case at our college it's been over a decade ago, a young man who put a Confederate flag up in his room, in his window so everyone could see it, simply because it bothered him that this message he felt was being imposed upon him, not that he actually disagreed with the message of inclusion. So one of the things I think it's very important that we do also is that we look within each religious tradition resources in scriptures, in great works of spiritual leaders, philosophers, support this message, right? We've all been drawing from within these traditions for the idea of acceptance, the idea of seeing the divinity in all beings, seeing the divine spark in all beings, loving all beings. It needs to come out organically from within the traditions and not be simply imposed, right? It shouldn't be, the term we use in our college when we discuss these, it shouldn't be an add-on. It shouldn't be something that you're just sort of stuck with because that's what society wants. But it really needs, the resources for it are existing already within our religious traditions. So we need to pull them out and use them for that purpose.
Please.
I just thought of something, an observation which I think would probably be very strange coming from a monk, but I just read somewhere a very interesting question. Would you want to marry yourself? You would not want to marry a carbon copy of yourself. You would want to marry somebody at least a little different from yourself. So I think marriage is a very good example of inclusion and diversity.
Good question, many fine responses. Let's open this up. Other questions? Yes, over here.
Again, this is not for any one special panelist, and this is so informative. One of the questions that comes to my mind, we talked about Sister Nivedita, and when she got involved in the freedom struggle and politics, she had to quit the Ramakrishna movement. And many of us shy away from politics, including many religions. But it is the politicians who many times we see all over the world creating a lot of this divisiveness. So my question is, how can we bring these kinds of dialogues, up and integrate this kind of mindset into politicians who are the ones creating policy and creating a lot of this? Is it totally wrong to even speak about religion and politics in the same?
Good question. Let's open it up. Who would like to address that?
Let me just make one point here. I remember in a similar conference, Interfaith Conference, we in the Ramakrishna order are completely non-political. We absolutely stay away from politics. And one of the speakers in this interfaith dialogue was talking about the relationships between the Chaitanyite Vaishnava movement and the Mughal emperors, how they had a very complex and very interesting relationship. Now somebody from our order asked the speaker, oh, but isn't it mixing religion and politics? Because we don't do that at all. Now this speaker, he quoted Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was accused of doing the same thing, mixing religion and politics. And he said, when he was asked, he was absolutely unapologetic about it. He said, the two greatest forces for human good that I know are religion and politics. And as long as I live, I shall do politics in religion and religion in politics. But he meant it in a positive sense. Yeah, but we as monks, we don't do that. We stay away from politics, yeah.
One word answer, vote.
I would say that part of it is, we've always talked about the separation of religion and state. But if we understand what political activity actually is, it's a way to organize our lives together. And that's really a call we all share. Luke Bretherington wrote a book called Resurrecting Democracy. It talks about faith in the public sphere. And he phrases it this way, that we are all called to live in a world we did not create, with people we cannot control, but with whom nevertheless we must share life. And so if that's the world we live in and how it works, then we have to be involved politically at some level.
So I'll give a more practical example of what's going on. So many of you have heard that hate crimes against Muslims have gone up by 67%. And at the same time, hate crimes against the Jewish community have gone up at the same time. And the interfaith dialogue that we were doing for the last 15 years finally gets to pay off, because we've made friends with one another, we trust each other, and together we have come and we have formed a council called Muslim Jewish Advisory Council. What is the purpose of this council? Now, this council is actually becoming political, because we don't have any other way of preventing these policies. So we're together, going together as two communities that are usually seen at odds with one another. So it's very surprising when you walk into a congressman's office and they see Jewish representatives and Muslim representatives together, because they always think of Israel and Palestine. That's the only way they think about this issue. And we're walking in there and we're saying our communities are being targeted deliberately, hate crimes, and we need you to do X, Y, and Z. So we're pushing for legislation together. So that, I think, is where the work needs to be when it comes to politics and this thing. We need to advocate for one another together. And today it's Jewish Muslim, tomorrow it can be Hindu Muslim, it could be any combination of things. But if we stand together and we ask politicians, please change this, because we are your constituents, right? We're voting for you, and you are serving us, and it's your obligation to do this. So that's one thing. I wanted to go back very quickly to this notion of the one to the many, which is, on our motto, the American motto is from the one to the many, right? And so when I was growing up in Kashmir, we were all in our lane. Everybody stood in their lane. The Muslims were doing their things, the Pandits were doing their things, the Sikhs were doing their things. But when it came time for holidays, we were all over each other, celebrating each other's holidays. Not necessarily going to the holidays, but a cake would arrive, that mithai would arrive, that Rakhi would be sent, even if you didn't tie it or you didn't believe in tying it. That was a way of showing, I honor you. And I think that if we do that, those little gestures are so important. When I started my organization, I started sending, at every holiday, I would send, an email newsletter. And I would say, Happy Hanukkah. And all of a sudden, then I get an Eid Mubarak. And then I said, Diwali. And they're sending another. This is what creates love and brotherhood amongst faiths, because we honor one another, we respect one another, and acknowledging that I celebrate you. And that's what our religions teach us.
Anyone want to add anything to that? Then, yes. We had a gentleman over here that I agreed to last time, so he's going to have his turn.
Yeah. One humble request to the galaxy of religious leads. As I was hearing all of you, one thing I felt was, is it not there in Hinduism? Or is it not that Swami Vivekananda has said, for example, like the divinity, the sparkness, and the relationships? So that basically gave me the perfect example, as Swami Sarvapriyananda said, the jewel, water, we are calling the same thing. But that also, going to the other example of the elephant, unless we put different pieces together, we cannot see the complete picture. So if I am hearing only Hinduism, I only see one part of that elephant. And Christians see one part of that elephant. So this conference opened my eyes, even though I'm not completely religious for Hinduism, but it gave me an example of everything together. So my request to you is, can we have these kind of interfaith conferences more often? And this is not just on 150th birth anniversary of Sister Nivedita. Maybe it can be a yearly thing. Next time, definitely, I will make sure my children are here. So they are here, so they will get benefited.
Bravo.
Thank you very much.
Bravo. We had a young lady over here.
Hi, I really wanted to thank you first for coming here and offering me and everyone else in this hall with this opportunity. So this question also applies to everyone, so anyone could really pick it up. So we're discussing interfaith, but at the same time, we all still kind of, we go under a single label. Like, if someone were to ask me who or what I recognize myself as, I'd say I was a Hindu. So what is the actual purpose of these labels? And are they really important? And do they all lead to the same truth? Thank you.
Great question. Who wants to jump in?
Okay. I can try to start. This won't be the whole answer. It'll just be the beginning of an answer. But what is the purpose of these labels? And I'm going to tap into the Buddhist tradition, if I may. We use labels for the sake of convenience, because we're stuck using this thing called language, and so I can't just call myself me all the time, and you would all be calling yourselves me, and we'd be going me, me, me. No one would know. So we come up with labels, and the labels have a certain convenience. I also identify myself as Hindu, even though I didn't grow up in the tradition, but it indicates a certain worldview, a certain way of living, it orients you somewhere in time and space and history. But I very deeply believe that while we should be very, very, very deeply committed to the spiritual paths that these labels point to, we ought to hold these labels very lightly and not be terribly attached to them, because that's, well, again, Yoda, that's the path to the dark side, right? That's what, because, well, then my label must be best. My label must be better than yours. I feel threatened because your label's different from mine. Then we have a problem, right? It is, in fact, I had someone I know challenge me very sharply about this issue of religious identity. Why do you call yourself a Hindu? Hindus are doing this bad thing and that bad thing and so on. And we got into a conversation, and I talked about, well, I identify with certain texts, certain teachers, and I don't know what else to call myself but that. But then I said, well, you can call me a Jedi Knight if you want to, because the label ultimately doesn't matter. And I think that's what I see a lot of spiritual teachers in many traditions talking about. The label is not what's important. It's what is it that's in your heart that you're trying to inadequately point to with that label. Do they all point to the same thing? I believe that, but then I think there is a lot of scope for debate about that, because if you look at every tradition as it describes its own aims and goals, they're often described in very different terms. So are these different ways of saying the same thing? Are they different parts of the elephant? Or are they just different? And that, I think, we can debate as long as we can do it in a respectful way. And I really like what the rabbi said about how we need to look not only for commonality, but also for difference, because it's difference that we learn from. Now, if everyone just agreed, there wouldn't really be much to talk about. So the labels are helpful if we handle them lightly, and where the paths lead, that is up to us to really decide by following them and doing so in relation to one another and learning from one another.
I remember when I asked this question of my spiritual teacher at the time, because I was also like not wanting a label, because I was against all labels. And he said to me, are you following Muhammad? I said, yes. Are you following are you willing to follow his tradition? I said, yes, because at that point I had already kind of come back. And he said, if you're following his tradition, then you are a Muslim, because you're following his way. So these labels are simply a way, right? The source is the same, the destination is the same, the journey is different. We're all traveling on a different road, but we're going to the same source. And the road can be Route 45, so that could be the Hindu one. Right. It could be Route 1, it could be Route 9. It's the road that you're going on to reach your destination that's different. And, but the source is the same, because, Yunus Emri, a very famous Sufi sheikh, said once that all religions are different rivers going into the same ocean. And ocean is God, and the different rivers just take you there. And the different rivers have their own ways. Some are straight, some are curved. So I think that it is, in my own community, we have this. Young Muslims don't want the Muslim label anymore. They want to call themselves spiritual or Sufi or goofy or whatever the term is. They just like, I don't want to call myself Muslim. It's okay, don't call yourself Muslim. You don't have to label yourself. It's what you are inside that God cares about. It's not your outer label. If you're afraid, don't, there's another famous Rumi story where the guy comes and knock on the door, and he says, who's there? He says, me. And he said, go away. And then he says, who's there? Knock, knock. Me. 3-4 times, me. And he says, go away. And then finally the guy on the other side realizes, he says, we, and then he says, oh, now you're welcome. In other words, we're the same.
Yes, I see someone back there.
Hi, I'm not exactly certain how I'm going to get to this, but everybody on your panel sort of has the same philosophical viewpoint, and it's obviously very filled with love. What I'm concerned about would be Darth Vader or the Dark Angel or the Fallen Angel, and do you invite everybody into your tent? I was at a protest with Tommy Robinson against Tommy Robinson at Columbia, in which he's very Islamophobic, and the whole thing about whether or not one should shut down his conversation became very important. Of course, I was out there demonstrating against what he was standing for, but the point is everybody here is similar-minded. In my work over the past 17 years working in social justice, it became very important to bring in for lack of a better phrase, the Antichrist, the person what we stood for represented the antithetical viewpoint. And, again, I don't want to get into the Hegelian dialectic and all of that, but everybody here sort of has the same viewpoint to really, and it was what the rabbi was saying, to bring in everybody into your tent and to have real diversity and real differentness, to really have the discussion with somebody who's really not like you at all in any way, shape, or form, and to be able to stay with that person in relationship to understand. Of course, I also feel I have moral superiority, which starts out wrong to begin with, but I do feel that way.
Yes.
Do you understand what I'm trying to get at there?
Yes, we do.
Well, I'll just make a comment here. You reminded me of two conversations I had. One with a Hindu preacher in Mumbai airport. I was waiting for my flight to the United States and I had 4 hours to kill at night. And there was this person from a Hindu sect, which is very different from our sect. Our approach is non-dualistic, and that was one of the most staunchly dualistic sects. So we had this nice, 3-hour-long quarrel about so it was very nice to spend the night. Time flew when you're quarreling, especially. And at the end of that, he didn't agree to what I was saying, but this person, he said, well, I know I am right, but if I did not know that, I would say there's a lot of merit to your viewpoint. And then on a flight from Detroit to Los Angeles, a long flight, there was this person from a Christian church, a very kind of Midwestern Christian denomination, who said, very interestingly, said almost exactly this mirror image of what the Hindu preacher had said, a kind of intolerant, exclusivist point of view. And I argued for what I was saying, what we are mostly talking about. I argued for this position. And at the end of the flight, when it was time for us to get down, he stood up and said, well, Swami, it's been an education speaking to you. I know I'm right, but if I did not know that, I would say you are talking sense.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to show what I'm thinking nowadays is actually the wisdom of, ordinary people, ordinariness. Because religious people tend to be, I know, what the God is about, or so, I don't know. But the thing is, for me, ordinariness may be a very important one, meaning like a Hitler, that's an evil person, are you sure? Or, the Mr. Trump, is this really that bad person? Or, something. Because this is, for me, it's a very important, because people has mixture, with the good aspect and bad aspect. Everything is a people, consists of one, but then it's always good or bad. For me, I like gray instead of black and white, although I have black and white. But anyway, so if mixed it, then become black and white, right? But the gray is actually, for me, it's very important. Then you don't compare, this is right and this is wrong, and so no judgment means. But then we do have a label. But the understanding is we do label it. Then you don't have to worry about too much of labeling anymore because you are labeling already. right? So then you could be away from the label. It's kind of strange, but I mean, for me, label comes from the division. You know, if you label, you know, you are not from me. I mean, it's a distinction because whether believe or not, I was not Japanese when I was in Japan.
Right, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Because no distinction or anything. So that's why only Japanese is Japanese. I mean, why I have to be Japanese, right? So the same way, Buddhism, you know, although I say Buddhist, but because, you know, you want to see me as a Buddhist, so that's why it's a label, but yet in part of the teaching, you know, part of the Buddhism itself is, you know, you have to even throw away your Buddhist. So it's no attachment is a very important part of the Buddhism. So, so that's one thing. But and then the one that I try to say is the ordinary people. Meaning, ordinary means so there's a good aspects and bad aspects. So it could be, you know, I'm correct, I know everything. But it could be other people might know something too. So which means I may not be totally sages. You know, I may make a mistake. Right, so like that. If that's the case, you know, maybe I can listen to others as well. You know, things that I have is not perfect. You know, once you realize you are not perfect. I'm not perfect. Then I can listen to the other people. So for me, it's a wisdom that I'm thinking. Actually, I'm thinking of create some kind of a peace organization. But this is one of the ideas that I feel like is very important to be. Don't be sages or don't be, you know, somebody who are religious or so-called, but then be ordinary people so that you can listen to the others and then you can make a mistake. But then, you know, it's okay to make mistakes. And then so maybe that's the kind of a ground that I feel like important to have at this point because it's always, you know, black and whites, and then it's a little bit tiring for me. so maybe I should do that. Great.
We're having such a rich discussion here, and we have time just for one. We had a very insistent question back on this side. We could continue this all night, and we'd have so much fun.
This question is for the panel. The question is, each one of the panelists did try their best to go deeper into their own religion, in their own language, in their own symbolism. My question is, can this be a solution, going deeper into the truths of your own religion, to the questions and problems we discussed here?
Yeah, interesting. We were talking about this. I call him the Hollywood Swami, since he came from Hollywood. Trying to give you a little cachet. Houston Smith, who wrote a best-selling book on world religions that started out, the religions of man, and then was rebranded to be more inclusive. And he was doing an interview, and he was asked a question. He's a Methodist pastor, I believe, before he passed away, and said, you're a Christian, but you've studied all the world's great traditions, and surely you probably take the best from each tradition for your own spiritual journey now, don't you? And he said, well, let me explain it this way. He said, I'm from Texas, and in Texas we drill for oil. And said, and when you drill for oil, it's better to drill one deep well than many shallow ones. And so for him, the solution for the way forward, to be rooted in a spirituality and faith tradition, and yet open to others, is to go deep within your own tradition.
It's beautiful.
As something that reminds me, that tied to Sister Nivedita, I was just reminded of a very interesting question. A young Swami asked one of the seniors, how did Swami Vivekananda make Nivedita Hindu? And the senior Swami looked at him and said, no, he did not. He just made her a better Christian.
Beautiful.
To bring in another metaphor, we've had many here, but why not? To bring in another metaphor and to bring in the wisdom of the mythologist Joseph Campbell for a moment. And Swami, you mentioned this. You know, he imagined that each of the world religions is a different path up the same mountain. And each of those trails twists and turns and has a different vista. And when you are a beginner, each trail is completely different, and it's as though you are standing on a different mountain. But the farther you go on that trail, the farther you get up closer to the peak, you start to realize that these paths have more and more in common. And so I think, speaking to the idea of digging a deep well, the farther you go on your own path, you will start to realize that actually you share so much with so many.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you want to? I think we've come to the end of our question and answer series. I would like to ask you to please thank our wonderful panelists and to show your appreciation.
On behalf of the Vedanta Society and its members, our deepest thanks to all our panelists and the speakers for this really wonderful evening. Our heartfelt thanks also to the Conference Planning Committee and all the volunteers who have given so generously of their time and their resources. You guys have been absolutely awesome. For me, it's been a great privilege to work with all of you. And we're also grateful for the extraordinary help we've received from Eva Ting, the Director of Events here at W83, and her staff. They couldn't have been more cooperative, kind, just wonderful. We're also grateful to the family of Pandit Vasant Rai for allowing us to use the recording of Rag Kiwani during our break. As you leave, please accept a small token of our thanks to you in the form of a box of snacks, which will be handed to you as you get to the elevators. And you can also take a look at the bookstore on your way out. And thank you for spending the evening with us. Thank you so much.